Hello and welcome
Hello.
back. Welcome to part 5 of the Monroe Files. We are everything vaguely paranormal. My name is Blake Smith, and with me is my fabulous special guest through this whole little adventure, Miss Shelley Pruitt.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Hey, you know what? Rolling and going and ready to hear a little bit about what was going on in Marilyn's early life. I can't wait. I know some of this,
Uh-huh.
but you always have something for me that I did not know. So I can't
Yes.
wait to see what you throw at me that I'm going to go, what?
It's a little bit of
So
it's been a little bit of a challenge week to week because I know you're a Maryland fan
I
as
am a
well.
Marilyn fan.
To find that one little bitty thing that you just may not know about. And I actually think that there may be quite a few in this episode that you
Really?
may actually not know about. I had to
Challenge
dig.
accepted.
I had to dig rather, I don't know, deep, pretty deep on some of it to find some. So I'm excited to share with it. We've got a lot of information to get through because we know Marilyn's life very traumatic.
Very tumultuous.
Yes, very roller coasters up and down all the way through. So I started thinking, first off, on the previous episodes, we went through all the stuff, everything that the actions and events that were taking up into her death, through her death. We heard all these statements and all that stuff over the last 60 years that just really throw the whole timeline way out of whack.
Hmm. A lot
and
of things don't add up.
no, especially after within the last 60 years, the things that have come out, it just you look at the timeline and go, wait a minute. But I wanted to roll down this uh journey of, the end result being Marilyn takes her own life. That's been kind of the accepted ending to Marilyn's story. I'll go on record to say I beg to differ, but
As do I.
that's my
But let's explore the possibility.
exactly. That's my personal feelings on it. And we would not be a true researcher or a true investigator into the life and death of Marilyn Monroe if we did not explore this route because it is a plausible option. So, with that, what do we do when we hit a dead end? We go all the way back to the beginning. So that's
That's
what we're
right.
going to do. Is we're going to start with the birth of Marilyn Monroe, or should we say, the birth
Norma
of Norma
Jean.
Jean. So Norma Jean Mortensen was born on June the 1st in Los Angeles County Hospital in Los Angeles, California. Though though she adopted her mother's name shortly thereafter of Baker, her birth certificate does read Norma Jean Mortensen. Fun fact: it is misspelled. It's supposed to be S-O-N. It's S-E-N on the birth certificate. So, and from the get-go, Norma Jean seemed to be facing this uphill battle in life, not just from her own situation, but also from her mother's and her grandmother's own issues. Now, her mother's name was Gladys. Oh my gosh, let me see if I can get this right. Gladys Pearl Monroe Baker Mortensen Ely was all her names, but we know her as Gladys Baker. So this is her and Norma Jean on the beach. And Norma Jean's birth for Gladys was not a happy occasion. The paperwork from the hospital actually shows that Gladys had a very hard time with some of the questions when it came to naming who the father was or how many children she even had. She had put Mortensen down as the father, possibly to conceal the illegitimacy of the birth. She was not married at the time. And she wrote down that she had given birth to 2 children prior to Norma Jean, but that neither of those children had lived. And that's not true because we know she had a son, Jack or Jackie, and a daughter, Bernice. And there's no real reason why she did this other than the notion that at the time it would have been very difficult for her giving birth in a time when single mothers was all basically but an abomination.
Right.
Um, and so, as with a lot of mothers that we know from then to now, she had major emotional spirals immediately after Norma Jean's birth. Um, prior
What today would have probably been labeled postpartum.
Exactly. But back then, with obstetrics
It
in
was
its
called the baby
infancy, the
blues.
baby blues, exactly. That's exactly what it was. Prior to her birth, her mother, Della Monroe, had been, and I'm not sure, I don't think that's Norma Jean in this photo. I do not believe so. I think it's too early of a photo for it to be Norma Jean. But this is Della Monroe, who is Gladys's mother. She'd been scheming on what to do about Gladys's little predicament. Um, she'd been speaking with a neighbor of theirs, which is Ida Bolander. And
No, that's a scary looking woman.
she'd been
You
speaking
should
to
have
Ida.
warned me. Oh Lord, she just
Sorry.
scared me. She got some crazy eyes.
Well, I
That's all.
think
It's an Ida May. Is that what you said?
Ida Bolander.
Oh Lord, Ida, my goodness, girl, could take down the intensity a notch. Go ahead with your story. Oh, if you're watching, be warned. This is a frightening woman.
Well, I think this was caught in a very wrong time of an interview that she gave later on in Marilyn Monroe's life. Whenever they were being interviewed about Marilyn's upbringing as Norma Jean. So they were talking. So Della was talking to Ida and her husband Wayne Bolander. They were neighbors of Della's about Gladys's situation, and she knew that her daughter, sorry, Della knew that her daughter Gladys was by no means monetarily or mentally capable of being able to take care of a child at this point. And between the two talks of Ida and Della, they kind of come up with this conclusion that Gladys should willingly give her new baby over to Ida and Wayne to be able to raise. That's going to be the best outcome and situation for Norman Jean. So
Give it to the neighbor, and then nobody will have to know it was your baby. And suddenly, look, we've adopted this wonderful child.
right. And so just 2 weeks after Norma Jean is born, on June 13th of 1926, Gladys takes Norma Jean over to the Bolander house and basically drops her off. Now, there was this, I guess, deal struck between the two women that Gladys would pay her about $25 a week to care for the child and all that stuff, as long as she could be able to come in, spend certain weekends with Norma Jean and be able to see her. So it wasn't like she dropped her off and never saw her again. She did come to visit, but you kind of get the sense from the very beginning of Norma Jean's life that she was like this burden that just needed to be unloaded.
She was a problem.
She was a problem. And
How funny that plays in later in her life that she
and
was a problem.
and that's the world that she's kind of born into. And unfortunately, the arrangement that Ida and Gladys had made about the payment and being able to see Norma Jean didn't really last long, because Gladys really took up a huge issue with how Ida was raising Norma Jean. The women, it's been said that the women kind of bickered back and forth about, this is my daughter. Well, I'm raising her, da da da, and all that kind of stuff. So it was about, so basically, kind of Gladys backed off a little bit of being able to come over and see Norma Jean. And about a year later, in 1927, Della Monroe comes back from being overseas. Now, that's Norma Jean's grandmother again, just for reference. She comes back overseas from India. She's sick with malaria at the time, and she's without her husband. Basically, her and her husband was estranged, and she's like, I'm going back to the States. And he's like, screw you, I'm not. And so she goes back to the States without him. And she made her way over to the Bolander house one day, and because she had this thought, I guess, and confronted Ida about it, she actually ended up breaking the glass in the window of the door, let herself into the Bolander home, and confronted Ida over the fact that she believed Norma Jean was dead. Like dead. She's like, I demand to see my granddaughter. I demand to see the child. Take me to the child. So Ida, like freaking out, she's like, of course, come on. Takes her to the room, shows Della where, little baby Norma Jean in her crib. And when Ida excuses herself to get a glass of water, this is what's reported. When she excuses herself to get a glass of water for Della, she comes back and Della is attempting to smother Norma Jean and kill her. And of course, Ida freaks out. And so she grabs the baby. Police are called. She tries to say, oh, no, 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 no. It was the pillow had slipped and I was just readjusting it. But it's actually after this that Della Monroe is sent to Norwalk State Hospital, where she's institutionalized. And that's kind of the first instance that you see of maybe this generational mental health issues that are taking place within the family. Because we know some of the things Marilyn Monroe faced later in life, and you have her grandmother being institutionalized when she's just a year old. And Della actually didn't survive very much longer after that. She had a weakened heart, and while she was at Norwalk State Hospital, she went into a seizure fit, had a heart attack, and died, essentially, after 19 days of being there.
So you said that she came back from India and that she had become sick with malaria. Now, I could be mistaken on this. Doesn't malaria actually affect your brain as well?
Ooh,
Could that have had something to do with her behavior? How sick was she
um,
when she got back? Do we know?
not necessarily. Just says that she was sick with a fever and it was from malaria. That's what's been reported in multiple sources. Um, I will
Because
tell you.
malaria, dengue fever, very similarly related,
Mhm.
and I'm almost certain. Now, please, if I'm wrong, somebody correct me in the comments. But I believe that that does affect your brain. So I just wonder if she came back sick enough that
Well,
she could have not been in her right mind.
this was part of the story that I kind of cut out because it goes a little bit further. But since you're asking about it, I'll go ahead and explain it. Della had kind of had mental health issues most of her whole life. Like Gladys, she had also kind of spiraled a little bit after giving birth to her children. And it was when Gladys, I believe, was like 9 years old. She had, I cannot remember off the top of my head if it was older or younger brother. Like I said, I cut this portion out.
There was a
Um,
sibling. Hmm.
there was a sibling. She had a sibling who was always trouble in school. Well, Della put together a suitcase, put everybody in the car, took this brother to a cousin's house, dropped him off, and the brother was never heard from again. And she just said, okay, wash my hands of you, done. But she was known to have these manic moments, this roller coaster throughout life of
Okay.
ups and downs.
So it
Um,
was not due to the disease, although I'm sure the disease did not help. It probably
Probably did not
exacerbated
help.
it.
Yeah, probably did not help. And right before she was institutionalized, Gladys had actually ended up moving in with her. So Gladys started living across the street from the Bolinders to help take care of her mom, Della. And Della came running downstairs one day and was like, her husband, who was in India, had broken into the house and sexually molested her. And none of it was true. And so it was kind of like mom and daughter had this like heart to heart moment at that point. That's after she tries to smother Norma Jean, and then she ends up being sent to the Norwalk Hospital and dying 19 days later after
Okay.
she's institutionalized there. So we go on kind of with life. Norma Jean's one at this point, and life at the Bolander house. Now, if you listen, this is where you got to separate fact versus fantasy with Marilyn, because life at the Bolander house for Marilyn, in her mind later on in life, was horrible. She always described herself as a waif. She wasn't an orphan. She never said she was an orphan. She was a waif. She just felt like she wasn't loved. But if you talk to and interview some of her foster siblings, which a lot of people have, they're like, no, it was a happy time. Like mom did this for us and took us here and made us dresses and we cooked and baked and it was a good time. So she goes on up until about the time that she is 7. Now, during all that time, Gladys herself starts to experience these episodes of paranoia. She believes she's being followed. Um, there, she's in fear of her life in some of these instances. And there's another instance at the Bolander house, and I believe this one is in 1929. So we're going to back up just a little bit for Norma Jean turned 7. So Norma Jean would be about 3, 4ish, maybe somewhere in there. And she comes over and she demands of Ida, where's Norma Jean? And she basically said, she's no longer going to be able to stay with you. I'm taking my daughter with me. And there was this scuffle in which Ida and Gladys, they're in the kitchen and basically Gladys goes running out the back door. Ida follows her. She shoves her to the side, runs back in the house, locks the back door. Well, Ida goes running around the front to get in, comes in, can't hear anything, all this stuff, nothing's going on. She runs outside, looks down both sides of the street to see if she's done run off with Norma Jean, doesn't see anybody, and all of a sudden she hears a commotion behind her, sees Gladys carrying a military duffel bag that is zipped tight, and that's when she can hear the moans and cries from inside the bag because Gladys has stuffed Norma Jean inside this bag and zipped her up and carried her outside the house. Now, of course, a struggle ensues. The women fight over the bag. The bag rips open. Norma Jean falls on the ground. She's sitting there crying. Ida picks her up, runs in the house, locks the door, and basically threatens to call the cops, and Gladys walks away. So that's at age 1. And then now you have at age about maybe 3-ish. You have these women, very tumultuous women, mom, grandmother, having these instances at her foster home that she's being raised. So like I said, life kind of goes on with Norma Jean up until about the time that she's. Go ahead.
Well, my question is, okay,
Yeah.
so the grandmother Della had agreed to pay Ida and Wayne twenty
No,
five
that was the
dollars a
mom.
week.
That was the mom,
Oh,
Gladys.
Gladys had okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to
Mm-hmm.
say that since Della was gone, who was still paying this $25 a week, and did it cease?
Yeah, it pretty much ceased because, like back when Gladys was spending the weekends with Norma Jean. She didn't really, they had that contention about how Norma Jean was being raised.
Right.
So that kind of tapered off a little bit more until this unfolded with her being stuffed in the duffel bag. And of course, Gladys was banned after that point
Right.
from the house. So from about that instance up until about the time Norma Jean is 7 years old, life goes on, like I was saying earlier, just kind of normal as all can be. And it wasn't until Ida called up Gladys because she'd been having these thoughts that, okay, Norma Jean's about 7 years old. It's about time that she needs to get to know her mother. And so she ends up calling Gladys. And it's really this moment, this first time of, I guess, maybe kind of being abandoned, if you will, that Norma Jean experiences. I mean, Ida packs up a little suitcase. There's a very tearful goodbye. Um, and she sends her off with this woman that Norma Jean doesn't even know. She's a stranger. It's her mother, but she's a stranger to her,
Right.
And in the car with Gladys was a woman whose name was Grace McKee, later to be Grace Goddard. We'll talk a little bit more about her here in just a second. Actually, just kidding. Right now, Grace Grace McKee, later Goddard. She's a very influential person on young Norma Jean. She was this stabilizing force in Gladys's life that was desperately needed. However, she was also the first one to mention to Marilyn, or Norma Jean, sorry, we're at Norma Jean right now, mentioned to Norma Jean that basically she could kind of be whatever she wanted to. She'd take her to the movies and she's like, one day you could be a big movie star. You could be up there. She was obsessed with films, by the way. She was also a cutter in Hollywood at Consolidated Studios. And so things kind of started to seem great for Norma Jean between like August and October of 1933, because she's about 7 years old now.
And if you don't know what a cutter is, that is the person who takes all of this film, because used to all this film would be on this one roll and they'd roll it and they roll it. And then what you have to do is you have to go and find the frame that they want to stop at. Then you literally splice the piece of film. Then you have to go to where they want to pick up because they don't want this scene in there. You go to where, and then you find a logical way, and then you literally cut it there and you have to put it back together in some way or another. And I'm not sure if it was like they actually, I'm not sure if it was like a thing where they would tape it or they would glue it or they would heat it to go it together. I would think they wouldn't heat it. I don't recall how they did it. I used to know this. But they literally would by hand cut that big reel of tape, kind of like what you see on our opening. They would take that and they would cut, and then they would find where they want to pick it up and they would cut that piece out and they would put the piece of film back together to make the reel that you would see in the theater. It was a very tedious job.
Yes.
So
yeah. And Grace and Gladys both were cutters at Consolidated Studios. So that's how they ended up getting to know each other and forming this friendship. So all was great up until about October of 1933. Gladys ends up receiving this letter from a former brother-in-law stating that her son, Jackie, had actually died of tuberculosis. And that was like a tailspin moment for Gladys. I mean, she did not take it well. She was screaming at Norma Jean, why wasn't it you? Why couldn't it have been you? And it's like a 1-2 punch, because within weeks of that tragic news, she gets a phone call from a relative stating that her grandfather has also died. But he didn't die in an ordinary way. He actually took his own life. He hung himself, unfortunately. And so for Gladys, in this tailspin moment, a lot of people said that this was when the voices started to kind of come about and they grew louder and louder. And she feared for it. She had seen her parents go mad and she was very confused. Like, am I going to be next? Basically, was this fearful moment for her. So, and Grace actually says that it was like a light went out in her. And from there on, she was in total darkness. There was actually never any coming back from it for Gladys.
It was kind of the moment that she lost control of the voices in her head.
Correct. And she just basically succumbed.
So we know that she had at least 3 children. Jackie, another sibling, and then Norma Jean and Bernice, right?
Jackie, Bernice, and Norma Jean.
Right. So we know there's at least 3. But wasn't there another? No?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Perhaps I'm thinking one of the foster children in the home with Ida and Wayne that I'm thinking of. Okay, go ahead. I just wanted to clear that up because I wanted to make sure I had it right in my head.
Yeah, the only ones that I know of are Jackie, Bernice, and Norma Jean.
Okay.
So, and it's things kind of go from bad to like just completely worse by 1934 because Gladys is diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic, and she is also institutionalized at Norwalk State Hospital indefinitely. There is no question. It is indefinitely. She's institutionalized.
And can we talk about kind of what that being institutionalized back then meant? It didn't mean that you were fed well and that you were given a bath every day, and it did not mean that you had medicine that would work. It meant that they either knocked you out
Mm-hmm.
constantly, they gave you electroshock therapy to keep you, they would put you in hot baths and ice baths where they would literally put you in a tub up to your neck and put some kind of rubber over the top of it, like a stretch rubber coating, put you in very hot water or very cold water. These were very inhumane things,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time, that was the cutting edge medicine. So I'm not sure if it was better to be in there or be out.
I don't know because you have mental health, uh, education, medical practices, medicine. It's all
They would
in.
give you lithium or
Yeah.
lobotomies, or, I mean, any number of things, especially if you were institutionalized for an indeterminate amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
That, and especially if you had no one to come and check on you, you kind of became, in some hospitals, and I'm not saying this about Norwalk, some hospitals, you became a lab rat.
Yeah. Yeah.
That happens a lot in the paranormal when we see that there's been a location that has had people treated poorly, that things
Yep.
tend to get ugly.
Mm-hmm. So when Gladys is institutionalized in 1934, Grace Goddard takes over being Norma Jean's guardian and also takes over Gladys's affairs as well while she's inside Norwalk State Hospital. Um, However, Grace ended up remarrying a guy named Doc Goddard. And when they remarried, Marilyn, unfortunately, was sent off to live in an orphanage home. And many of like Monroe historians don't really understand the exact full reason why she was sent to an orphanage home. A lot speculate that it's because Goddard wanted to bring his own children into the marriage, and having one more mouth to feed was just going to be one too many. Um, I kind of learned throughout her history, he's kind of a, I'm sorry, I'm going to say, he's kind of a bit of a dick.
I was going to say, he's got untrustworthy eyes. He looks shifty.
Yeah, and unless I'm just getting it completely wrong, and all the sources that I read are just getting it completely wrong. Like this man to me is just not a very loving man. You know, you send a kid to an orphanage because you want to bring your own kids in, and one more mouth is too many mouths. That's what a lot of people have speculated it to be. So Marilyn goes to the orphanage home, and she spends roughly about a year and a half there, and she gets taken back out by Grace and Doc. But once she's back in their home, there's again contention at the house. And it's basically like Doc and Norma Jean don't really see eye to eye. You know, there's other kids there now, and there's just this contention with bringing Norma Jean back in. So Norma Jean is actually then sent off to live with Olive Monroe, who is the married in aunt of the brother that went missing, or the brother of Gladys that was dropped off at a cousin's house. He eventually does go missing. He's actually never seen again after a certain year, so he does end up going missing. But that brother's name was Marion Otis Monroe, and so she goes to live with
Her
his
uncle,
wife.
her uncle or her aunt. It's her
Yeah,
aunt, right?
yeah,
Because that
Olive
is that
Monroe.
is Della's child and Gladys's brother,
Yeah,
her mother's
yeah,
brother. So she goes to live with her uncle or her aunt,
yeah,
Olive.
yeah. And so she doesn't spend much time there. She moves on, and this is what I'm saying. This girl has moved around so much. From there, she moves in who a lot of people classified, and even Norma Jean classified, well, Marilyn later on classified, was her favorite aunt. It was Edith Anna Lauer, and that's actually Grace Goddard's aunt that she moves in. And that was in the fall of 1938. So Marilyn is about 12 years old at this point, and she's been moved around this much. However, as luck would have it for Norma Jean, Edith Lauer's health wasn't in the best of conditions or good shape. And about a year and a half into it, it's decided that she goes back to the Goddard house. So to me, it's like she doesn't spend more than like a year and a half in a home. based just on circumstances and people pulling her to and from, so to speak. So she moves back in with them. However, at this time, she actually seemed to be blending with the family now. But Doc ends up getting a job on the East Coast, and there's a bit of a difference in story here. It's been told and read. It's either because the laws accustomed to a minor, foster minor at that point, or because Goddard didn't want to take her with them, Norma Jean was going to be sent back to the orphanage home. And Grace is like, I can't freaking have that. She can't keep going back because she's going to be there till she ages out or she gets adopted again. And so she gets with a lady basically across the street. By the way, here's a picture of Marilyn and her favorite aunt. That's Edith Anna Lauer. And so Grace gets with the neighbor lady across the street, Ethel Doherty, and she hatches a plan that their kids are going to get married, so to speak. And so she kind of plays matchmaker, if you will, by being like, well, if the girls walk to school, can Jim bring them home? Is that okay? And so he agrees on stuff. And at first, these two weren't really, they were very reluctant to get married. She was literally barely 16 when they got married. I think it was 2 weeks after her 16th birthday. She gets married to Jim Doherty, who is 21 at the time. And it's not that it was an unhappy marriage. They were just both young, Marilyn especially. You know, she just didn't really get it. You know, she didn't get what marriage was. But a year after that they're married, Jim joins the Navy, and he is stationed in Catalina Island for that first year of the marriage. This is kind of the first time that in Marilyn's life, or Norma Jean's life, that we see this paranoia seep in. Jim Doherty describes a moment in their marriage where he gets up in the middle of the night and he goes to find his wife. His wife is not in bed. And he notices it looks like she kind of left the house in a rush. And he stands at the window and he looks out across and he sees her coming back in a hurried state. So he goes back to lay to bed. I don't know why. I would have been standing at the window when she walked in. But anyways, needless to say, he goes back to bed. When she comes in a hurry. She goes to the bed and she was like, there's a man following me. And he's like, what? And of course he's concerned. So he gets up and he's like, there's no man. What are you talking about? She's like, no, I saw a man that was following me. And she tells him that it's like he was following her, but then he was in a tree and then a darkened house and a parked car across the street. And none of it was like making sense to Jim. He's like, there's no man following you, you know, but she was insistent. I mean, she was crying in his arms by the end of this. So that's really kind of this first moments that's been told by Jim that we go, ooh, okay,
Something's wrong.
There's something there, you know. So in 1944, Jim gets shipped out to the Pacific. And it's his long stints away from home that really put a strain on their marriage. And Norma Jean's, let's face it, ambitions were just way too great to just remain a housewife for all eternity. So she takes a job at Radio Plane Factory, which is a munitions factory making parts for the war effort. And while she's there, she gets noticed by a photographer and she ends up signing with Blue Book Model Agency. And over the next 4 years of their marriage, that's how long their marriage was, it really is strained, not only due to the distance, but because Marilyn takes on this new career and she starts putting it first. And so she really, I mean, she was on the cover of like 33 different magazines within her first couple of years at this job. Beautiful young girl, you know. And so what ends up happening is she grabs the attention of 20th Century Fox, or well, a guy that has a connection to 20th Century Fox, and they give her a screen test. And they want to sign her, but they're like, you know what? We're not going to sign you as a married woman. We're just not going to have it. And so to her, of course, trade off is best. Yeah, why not?
And that was not an unusual practice. They wanted their stars to appear available because
Yes.
then every man or every woman was like, "Oh, I could date them." And a lot of the studios would do the, hey, win a date with or win an evening out with. And if they were married, that just wasn't going to fly. So they wanted their young stars to be single.
Yeah. So in September of 1946, after 4 years, Marilyn ends up divorcing Jim Doherty through a Dear John letter that she writes him. And she ends up signing with 20th Century Fox. And I forget the guy's. I know his last name is Lyon, but I forget his first name. He's the one that helps Norma Jean come up with the stage name Marilyn Monroe. He said that she reminded him of Marilyn Miller, the Broadway star, and she took Monroe because that was her mother's maiden name. And so in 1946, Marilyn Monroe is essentially born. The illusion is cracked open. And this is actually Marilyn in 1946. I mean, this is after she had just got signed. So stunning freaking girl. But anyways, so you have this girl who's in her 20s at this point. You know, she's never known anything else but being shuffled around from home to home. And she's divorcing her husband. She's starting, she's starting to play out this fantasy that she's built
on a
since
new
Grace,
adventure.
Since Grace told her, you can do this. You know, she's on this new adventure. So
and someone wants her. And that is a movie studio.
And I think that this is the moment where we really begin to see the mixture of like Marilyn's pure and raw talent, because let's face it, she had it, her determination, and her carefully chosen embraces with powerful men. Because let's face it, she also did that. And she always seemed to be searching at this point for something that she never had. So
stability.
Mm-hmm. And it's basically during her first year that she does all the singing and acting and all that kind of stuff. But she networks. She works her little booty off. She is in producers' offices. She frequents them. She entertains influential guests at studio functions, mainly the men. And it's also said that during this time, she also became friends and sex partner with Joseph Skank, who was a film studio executive as chairman of 20th Century Fox. Now, this is also another moment when she breaks into the stardom that we see another moment in Marilyn's mind, because she has these managers. They're not really managers so much as mentor actors. Lucille Ryman and John Carroll. Those are the two that are pictured on the left. And Marilyn calls Lucille one night and says, there's a kid peeping in on me. And Lucille says, what are you talking about? Marilyn says, I'm being watched. Lucille says, but how? And Marilyn says, he has a ladder and he's on it and he's watching me. And Lucille says, Marilyn, a ladder would not reach the third floor. You must be dreaming. And she almost screams into the phone, but I'm awake. I'm awake. And at one point, Lucille has actually said at one point, we thought about it and realized that she was running our lives, calling all the time, crying on the phone. We didn't know what to do. A lot of crazy things were going on, and it was too much. She didn't know how to handle her life, and she fell apart. We liked her, but we needed her and her craziness out of our lives. And that was a quote by Lucille Ryman, which very sweet.
Now, let me ask a question.
Okay.
And this is something that I actually have thought about on this. Is it possible that maybe she had seen that her mother had done this, and her mother had been given a lot of attention and a lot of care, and a lot of time had been taken to put her mother, people would come and help her mother whenever her mother would act a little. Do you think that perhaps, here we go with nature versus nurture, could this have been a learned behavior when I feel like I'm not being paid attention to? Maybe something terrible can be going on, and I can get someone to come and help me, and they'll pay attention to me, because sometimes negative attention is the only attention people know how to get.
It could very well be. I'm not going to doubt that. My only thing is the amount of time that she spent with her mother during her childhood, essentially. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of time with her mother. We see her mother visiting with the Bollanders after she's born. And then she gets her back when she's 7, but it's for a very short amount of time. I think it's only like a couple of months that she has her, so I don't know if, other than that traumatic moment of finding out that her son died and her grandfather died, that Marilyn was able to experience Gladys like at her worst, I guess you could say. At her worst,
yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question, though. Was that one moment so traumatizing for her that she saw how everybody reacted?
How suddenly everyone was flocking to her mother. Oh, my goodness, you poor dear. Oh, my goodness, of course. Don't worry about the children. We've got, we're here for you. If you need us, just let us know. Just call us anytime. Tell us what's going on. And again, that kind of goes back to the husband seeing her walking outside. Why does he not go out to check on her? Hey, are you okay? See, that's odd to me.
Yeah.
And if that is attention seeking, then okay, I'm going to stand here. Well, you aren't coming back in. I guess I better go back in and go, oh my gosh, why didn't you come outside? I could have been killed.
Yeah.
And we all know that person that does that. that somehow or another it gets inflated in their mind.
Hmm.
And, well, why didn't you come outside? Someone could have killed me. I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure I saw somebody over there. And you're going, but no, you didn't. There's no one there.
I think that if it was that, I'm not saying that it is, but if it was that it could have it could have been the opening for what would have been more of a major mental health issue later on down the road for her. That could have sparked it, I mean, it could have been the seed, that sprouted in her brain. I'm not sure.
I'm just curious about that because
Yeah.
that's always been something that, and I'm not saying that anyone with a mental health issue doesn't legitimately have it. I'm just saying that yes, it's in her history, but it isn't. I mean, it doesn't always transfer down,
Right.
and what she saw being so tumultuous and so traumatic when she was little, her mother acting ridiculous, and for lack of a better word, not being able to be in control. And this is a child who sees it just as her mom is acting, for lack of a better word, crazy. And
Hmm.
her mother really does have a mental break and a mental split with reality. So again, that learned behavior, and could it have been? Absolutely. I'm just curious. I'm
Yeah.
just curious because maybe she really did think she saw somebody, but now, okay, I have to call somebody because I thought I saw somebody, and you have to come over here right now because they've got a ladder.
Right.
That's
Right.
very easy. You walk and you say, walk over, open up the window, and you look outside. Tell me what you see. But that isn't what's said. They go, oh, we got to get out of her life. She's acting crazy.
Yeah.
Could that have
Yeah.
been an attempt to get them to come over because she was lonely?
Could have been. I'm not saying that it's not, and I'm not saying that it is. I think it. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that because
Continue on. It's just something I just thought about, and I thought maybe I'd
yeah.
ask you your opinion on it.
Okay. So in 1948, Marilyn goes and she attends this party, and by chance she meets like this Hollywood playboy. His name is Pat DeSico. I think it's DeSico. I'm not sure. I'm going to butcher it. Sorry. And he has been asked by Joseph Skank to find him some models for a Saturday night gathering that he's having with some friends, basically a man's party. And so he does. And Marilyn is one of those women. She realizes very quickly that the women attending this party would disappear with these men for some time. And Marilyn again caught the eye of Joseph Skank at this party. And Marilyn actually describes to her stand-in later on in life, Evelyn Moriarty. Yeah, that last name. I get tongue.
Moriarty.
Thank you. I get
You're
tongue-tied very
welcome.
easily. Marilyn is actually quoted from Evelyn as saying, "quote I can't say that I enjoyed it, but I can say that I didn't feel as if I had any choice."
The casting
Sh
couch was very real.
Yeah. She described the whole event as, quote, very tawdry, and that she felt, quote, terrible about it. It was like giving up my soul, as Al Evelyn says she described it to her. But see, Marilyn had started figuring out what she referred to as the Hollywood game. And she knew how to play it. I'm not gonna lie, she knew how to play along. And she knew she needed to if she ever wanted to make a career in this business. That's how it was back then. Now it's the dollar bill. Back then, it was all about sex. That's what Hollywood was back then. Just gonna throw that out there. And I think speaking of seeds earlier, I think this is the moment where I think the seed is planted that men take things from her. That's all that they want is to take things from her. Is this casting couch conquest, if you will, of hers, that's all she's able to give men. But despite having, or well, not despite, but with having this relationship with Skank, she does end up getting another screen test at Columbia Pictures. And that's the actual next studio to sign her. But she meets the man that I would say fell head over heels for Marilyn. He was 53 when she was 23, I believe. So there was a little bit of an age gap. And he worked at William Morris Agency, and his name was good old Johnny Hyde. And Johnny Hyde was smitten for Marilyn. He left his wife for her. He kept trying to marry her. He kept pressing her about marriage, saying that when he died, she'd be the richest woman on the planet. The only problem was the feeling of love never really materialized for Marilyn. She liked him, And
But
she
not like
enjoyed his
that.
company, but not like that.
And
And
the studio didn't want her to be married.
yeah. And so the second problem with this arrangement was that Johnny, unfortunately, would only have months to live at this point. But in those few months, he was able to secure her some pretty good movies and things like The Asphalt Jungle, All About Eve. And it's during this time that she meets Natasha Lattès, or Lattès, however you want to pronounce it, which is Marilyn's acting coach for quite some time. I think all the way up to like 1955. And Natasha ends up approaching Johnny at this time about Marilyn hearing voices.
Mm.
And Johnny takes this information. It's almost like he's not bothered by it, like he was aware of the situation already. So we don't really see much come of that. We just note that it's another moment in Marilyn's history that something is being said that has to do with her mental health that's being brought to the attention of somebody. And it's just kind of like, okay.
So
You know,
again, that actually kind of takes away from the theory of could it be an attention seeking um,
right,
ploy, for
right,
lack of a better word.
right.
So now we have someone who is her acting coach, also just mentioning, just kind of, hey, do you know anything about this? She says she hears voices.
Yeah.
But as far as we know, Johnny never reports any of this or anything like that, right?
Not to my knowledge, not that I was
Okay.
able to find. It's only reported from Natasha to Johnny. And Johnny's
Okay.
just kind of like, okay. He just rolls with it, so to speak. So by the end of the year in 1949, Johnny was able to get Marilyn a 3-year contract through with the William Morris Agency. So Johnny Hyde is pretty pivotal in planting Marilyn's career, like shooting her to stardom. This is the beginning of it. He basically thought if I put Marilyn in enough films, someone's going to notice her. Well, duh. More screen time you have, the more chances you have to get noticed.
And Philip Morris was the biggest player in the game.
Yeah. But however, prior to landing that 3-year contract, in May of 1949, Marilyn was approached by a photographer who had a connection to a guy named John Baumgarth, who was looking for women to pose on calendars for him. And at first, Marilyn was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then she was like, you know what? Shit, I'm broke. Yeah, sign me up. Well, Marilyn ends up posing nude on these calendars, which is, oh my God, now she's got a contract at the end of the year. She never thought anything about these photos. I'll side note, they're very tastefully done. I have a picture of it. Anyways, she never really saw anything of it. So yeah, she signs it. Mona Monroe, I believe, was the signature that she put on the contract. And so she goes on with life. And by mid-December, we're going to skip a whole year, basically. We're jumping through Marilyn's life. By mid-December 1950, Johnny Hyde ends up passing away from a heart attack. And this was absolutely devastating to Marilyn because although she did not really, love never materialized for her, so to speak, she felt for him. She enjoyed his company. And he was very pivotal in securing her all of these roles in this contract. What was she going to do? Oh, my God. And it was a couple of days after Hyde's funeral because Hyde's widow and estranged wife would not let Marilyn go to the funeral.
I'm not
And
sure I would either.
yeah, no. And it was a couple of days after this that Natasha returned home from work at the studio. Marilyn and Natasha at this point were living together and found Marilyn in her bedroom. She was unresponsive. Her cheeks were puffed out and her color, as Natasha said, was awful. And she shook Marilyn and pried open her mouth to find undissolved pills. And Marilyn had told her that she had taken sleeping pills and fallen asleep prior to them for her to be able to swallow them. Now that's the reason that she gave. She would go on to later say no, she was not trying to take her own life over Johnny Hyde. She would never do that. She just had all of these emotions that she was trying to sort through was the reason for taking the sleeping pills. But that was never enough for Natasha. She fully believed that Marilyn had attempted to take her own life over the death of Johnny Hyde. When Marilyn kept telling her that's just not the case. So, excuse me. After all of this Johnny Hyde business goes down, Marilyn decides that she wants to go on an adventure to try and meet the father that she never knew. She'd always heard from her mother a couple of things about the men that could have been her father, one of them being in a flash moment of Charles Stanley Gifford. Now, this was a gentleman who also worked at Consolidated Studios, as supposedly he and Gladys Baker had an affair together. He vehemently denied it because he said, no, there's no way that I'm your baby's daddy because you have loose morals. You're a promiscuous woman. How do you know? And he carried this throughout his whole life. So Marilyn had heard this and she's like, you know what? We're going to find him. We're going to go. And so she ends up going with Natasha, finds where he lives, goes to the door, knocks on the door. The only person that answers is his wife, who hands Marilyn a card to their attorney. And that's it. So Marilyn is not able to meet Charles Stanley Gifford. Now, Gifford Jr. states that this is completely implausible, that Marilyn could not be his sister, could not be the love child of Gladys and Charles. However, in April of this year, in 2022, a DNA test was done on hair taken from Marilyn on the day that she was embalmed. And Charles Stanley Gifford's, I believe it was his known granddaughter, for a documentary called Marilyn, Her Final Secret. And sadly enough, the DNA came back that it was a match to Charles Stanley Gifford. That he was, in fact, as this document claims, Marilyn's biological father. And to me, that's just absolutely heartbreaking because she never knew her father. She always wanted to know her father. She idolized these other men that she wanted them to be her father. And she gets the chance to be face to face to him and he doesn't want to see her. You know, I get it on his side, but I think that it's just absolutely heartbreaking for her to be so close to him, but to never get to see his face, face to face. So she experiences this major loss when he wouldn't see her. And so Marilyn ends up going back. And shortly after trying to get a visit with Charles Stanley Gifford, she gets word that Jasper Newton Baker, who's the man pictured in the middle here, who was Gladys Baker's first husband. Yes, I'm trying to keep him in order. Gladys Baker's first husband has passed. And this was the father of Jackie, Gladys's son that passed, and Bernice. And at a young age, this is the one that Marilyn had been told by Gladys that Jasper was her father, despite her birth certificate saying Mortensen. And also despite Charles Gifford. Yeah, you kind of get this idea of what her mother was like with her fathers, with Marilyn. And it's just one of those, is a crushing blow that this was the man that Marilyn had closely held from a young age as her father, and his death basically killed this father figure fantasy that she had, that her father was out there, and he was alive. Not only would this one not see her, but this one has now died. So she's hit with a 1-2 punch. So she ends up trying to recoil from all this shit, basically. And she brings on a new manager at this point, Inez Melson. Now, Inez Melson is instructed to try and find Gladys to send her money. Gladys was institutionalized, but now Gladys is out. She's been released. Wasn't indefinitely, as we were told. Gladys is remarried to this gentleman. I forget his first name.
Is this marriage number 4 at this point, or number 3?
1, 2, 3.
Number 3. Okay.
Like, sorry, I'm trying to.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to keep up with you.
Mm-hmm. And so she basically tells her, find my mother, send her money. She goes, okay, I will. But that was really hard to do because Gladys was traveling the country with her new husband, who basically, I guess, got her out of the institution. I don't really ever know how Gladys got out of the institution. I looked for it, couldn't find it. Now, it's one evening during this time that Inez is trying to find Gladys. Marilyn receives a long-distance phone call from Gladys herself, basically bashing Marilyn and saying that Marilyn wasn't appreciative and Marilyn hadn't thanked her for the month that she stayed with her when she was married to Jim Doherty. And this strange call ends with Gladys telling Marilyn that she, Gladys, was in grave danger. And she told Marilyn, you're being watched. You have to believe me, Norma Jean. And the phone went silent. And so that could be the first seed of this being followed, of this being, but then again, we go back to Jim Doherty. She's being followed with the man outside,
But with someone that does have that, that's a reinforcement of that psychosis. And I mean, I haven't done anything more than study a couple of psychology classes, but that's the one thing that that will definitely compound on is reinforcing a psychosis is not good.
Yeah.
Not good for the person who has it.
Yeah. And also, it's kind of interesting this parallel of mental health with mother daughter, so nature versus nurture type thing again. Um, I don't know. So Marilyn gets this cryptic message from her mother, but she goes on with life. And in March 1952, Marilyn had already met and went on a date with another man. And this would be none other than baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, who we know all about him and their marriage. Now, she wasn't exactly eager to meet him, but boy, howdy, was he eager to meet her. Matter of fact, it's actually said that she had just figured he was another egotistical baseball player or maybe football player. She wasn't really sure. Um, she didn't know much about the sport. She wondered what the hell they were going to have in common. So she did what she did best in these social situations, and she was late by almost 2 hours. And despite her being late by almost 2 hours, the night went off without a hitch. They didn't want to separate from each other. And within weeks of meeting DiMaggio, Marilyn is actually hit with probably the biggest scandal of what I would classify in my mind, the biggest scandal of her career, other than the Kennedy affairs. The pictures taken years ago by John Baumgarth are all of a sudden published. And there's this woman nude, and it looks like Marilyn. Oh my God. And instead of hiding from it, Marilyn comes forward and goes, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I was broke. So what? And in doing this and disclosing this full transparency, she ends up winning public sympathy for her, and it actually helps to push her star even like higher. She had already been in films like As Young as You Feel, Love Nest, Let's Make It Legal, Don't Bother to Knock. All of these films had already happened, so her star was a little bit climbing, and she's just like, yeah, so what, I did it, who cares. It's pretty interesting to me.
Well, that is something that is still goes on in today's society is because people love to see people fall. But if you just go, yeah, it was me, I'm real sorry about that. But, that's what happened. We're real quick to forgive you and be like, you know what, honey, I would have done the same thing. You know what? You're all right. You were honest. You didn't lie about it. You were honest. We're like, da, 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 up you go. Yeah, that's kind of a get out in front of it kind of thing. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to get out in front of it and say, yes, it was me, because if there's nothing to hide, then you can't use it against me because the world already knows.
Yeah. Yeah. So
You don't control me.
Yeah, so it's like she has this little bit of confidence boost at that moment, but she has the rug yanked out from underneath her again. It's actually leaked to the press that Marilyn's mother is actually alive and not dead, as Marilyn has been saying. Because Marilyn has been telling people that she was basically, her parents were not alive. And so it's leaked out that her mother is in fact alive, and the public takes it so much not as her mother is alive, but that Marilyn lied. That's the
Yep.
biggest part of it. And so again, Marilyn does what she does best. She took it head on. She gave a direct interview to Redbook for the publication that read in part, quote, "I frankly did not feel wrong in withholding from you the facet that my mother is still alive, since we have never known each other intimately and have never enjoyed the normal relationship of mother and daughter." And she also calls the journalist himself from her hospital bed at this moment, where she is having her appendix taken out, and used the same strategy as the calendar scandal, and gave him a one-on-one interview and was like, what do you want to know? Let's do it. And so she kind of starts to overcome the scandal, but in the midst, she receives a letter from Gladys that says, quote, "Dear Marilyn, please, dear child, I'd like to receive a letter from you. Things are very annoying here, and I'd like to move away with you as soon as possible. I'd like to have my child's love instead of hatred." Because at this time, Gladys's husband, John Ely, that was his name, sorry, he had died. And she was actually living back with Ida Bolander, of all people. And she was not having a good go of it, because these women
Ida
did
Wayne,
not
huh?
see eye to eye.
Yeah, oh,
Yes,
Ida
yes,
Wayne.
yes, yes. And so, as much as Marilyn tried, the public's perception of Marilyn was that she kind of became this heartless person
Cold.
and disowned her mother when it came out that her mother was institutionalized. Um, but when in fact, I would like to set the record straight, she did everything that she possibly tried to help her mother. But again, the public's going to see what they're going to see. Um,
Yeah, they
sorry,
never saw
I
the
thought you
mother
had
who.
something. Sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I was waiting for you to finish that. The public never saw the mother who pretty much was just like, "I'll let somebody else raise her." You know what? Okay, I'm gonna be doing what I want to do. Okay, I want to see you. Yeah, I'm gonna shove you in a duffel bag. Yeah, my mother's gonna try to smother you.
Yeah,
Um, eh, the constant moving, never really having a stable home, and yeah, for all practical purposes, as shitty as this sounds, she didn't have a mother.
no,
She had
yeah,
an anchor that did everything it could to hold her down whenever she was on the way up. Much
yeah.
like her grandmother tried to do in smothering her when she was little, trying to smother her, her actual mother was trying to pull her back down where she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't have a mother.
So it's just kind of like you see this very tumultuous moment for Marilyn. It's like death upon death. She's unable to meet her supposed father. Scandal upon scandal. And all in the while of all this, Marilyn is continuing to have these episodes in which she is hearing voices outside of her door. It's reported by Natasha Lattès that she's hearing voices outside her door. She's convinced she's being followed. And we're really only talking about a time span between 1948 and 1952. And she
four
had,
years.
yeah, and she had just met the man who I feel like loved her unconditionally. Or I take that back, loved Norma Jean unconditionally, which was Joe DiMaggio. But there was one issue with him is that he was conservative. She definitely was not, and neither were willing to budge. Because DiMaggio wanted Marilyn to be this woman who stayed home and raised the children, took care of the household, and did all of her household duties.
Be a good little wife.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
And he
And
was the star.
we definitely know that that was not Marilyn. Uh, now, the physical attraction to one another was intense, which I think led to the relationship and the marriage. But he did. He wanted her to quit his career. You know, Marilyn actually recalls in this time, quote, "I want to be a star more than anything. It's something precious. I didn't want to give up my career, and that's what Joe wanted me to do most of all. He wanted me to be a beautiful ex-actress, just like he was the great former baseball player. We were to ride into some sunset together, but I wasn't ready for that kind of journey yet. I wasn't even 30, for heaven's sakes." So in this new little dating whatever, she lands probably the best roles in my opinion that she's ever landed in her life, and that is Niagara, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, and River of No Return. I mean, my God, we're talking about pinnacle of Marilyn movies here. And that really only added fuel to the fire for DiMaggio. And he started becoming more and more jealous the more
He
attention
was
she
very
received.
jealous. He didn't want other men even looking at her.
Yep. And so, out of all this, Joe DiMaggio being jealous, she's starting to gain all these movie roles. Gladys is once again institutionalized at Rock Haven Sanitarium in early of 1953. She had threatened Grace with torture because Grace made her take a train ride from Florida back to California. I think I would too, but anyways, that's beside the point. But truth be told, Gladys was actually, because Florida is where Bernice, Marilyn's half sister, lived, and that's where Gladys was. And Gladys was having episodes while she was down there. And so she ended up getting a train ticket back to California. And after she got back to California, she threatened Grace and got institutionalized. So
And who is Grace again?
Grace Goddard, and her mother, who took over Norma Jean as guardian and took over her mother's affair when she
The
was
one who
first.
told Norma Jean she could be anything she wanted to be, that used to take her to the movies. Got it.
Correct.
Just want to
Correct.
make sure I'd make sure I had my person right.
Yep. And that was in early of 1953. And 1953 for Marilyn was a horrible year because in May of 1953, Marilyn learns that Grace Goddard had held a horrible secret from everybody that she knew. And that was the fact that she had cancer. And she probably didn't really have very long. And Marilyn herself was also diagnosed with endometriosis. And practically no one knew about that either. And so the two women somewhat bonded over these medical issues that they had had. Um, by now, it had come to light that Marilyn started the use of sleeping pills to help her sleep, as well as drinking. I don't think it was as heavy as it was in later years, but she had begun this by now. And in September of 1953, Grace Goddard ended up succumbing to her cancer and passing away. And so Marilyn places a call to her mother to tell her that her best friend or friend has passed away, to which Gladys said it was probably for the best. Grace had been followed for years, and if she hadn't died, quote, someone was going to kill her. Those are Gladys's words to Marilyn. And it actually comes out later, even after Marilyn's death, that Grace Goddard's death certificate reads, "Death by barbiturate poisoning, ingestion of phenobarbital." She didn't wait to succumb to the cancer. She
She went out
decided
on her
she was
terms.
going to go out on her terms. And so Marilyn returned to her and Grace's home, who had began sharing at this point a place to live, with nothing but memories and eerily something that would make the pain a little bit more bearable, which was nothing but bottles and bottles of pills. Because Grace and Marilyn were both sick women, cancer, endometriosis. Endometriosis I know is extremely painful. I've sat and talked to a lot of my female friends who have it. It's not something to play with. And cancer, is horrible. So the end of 1953 saw Marilyn almost in total collapse. She ends up fighting with the studio, taking roles that she didn't really want to take. She had found out that her co-star Frank Sinatra was actually being paid $5,000 a week, while she was only making $1,500 for a movie that they were trying to work together. And she had to deal with losing Grace, and her and DiMaggio were also having issues of their own at this time. So it was just a shitty very end of 1953 for her. She had become a different woman than Joe DiMaggio had met. She was constantly distraught. This is per DiMaggio. She's constantly distraught, anxious, run down, couldn't sleep without pills, and lethargic on some days. And the issue was that Joe thought the people on the sets of her movies and her fans treated her, quote, like a goddamn princess. That was his issue. Because Joe was the one who was used to being the center of attention. I mean,
That's right. He was the star.
He was. And let's face it, but next to Marilyn Monroe, no man was ever going to be the center of attention.
No, was not going to happen.
As Marilyn would put it herself, is goddamn Marilyn Monroe. It's just not going to happen. So I think what's happening at this point in Marilyn's life is she's dealing with a lot deeper demons. And her acting coach, Natasha Lattès, seemed to be the only one who would be there, as Natasha put it, which I don't understand this, but Natasha put it, quote, calm the voices when they got too loud. I don't know if this is kind of Natasha feeding into a narrative or if Marilyn had actually spoken these words to her. I was never able to really kind of confirm that. I don't know. It kind of irks me that Natasha is the one that's actually like saying that out loud. So Marilyn started to begin to mask her mental health episodes with physical sicknesses in order to recover. So when the studio would send the doctors, Marilyn would only speak with Natasha. She would not speak with the studio doctor. She would only speak with Natasha. So Natasha started becoming this ever-growing presence in all aspects of Marilyn's life. And I believe that DiMaggio began to feel that Natasha was a lot more important to her. Or wait, yeah, Natasha was a lot more important to her than DiMaggio was to Marilyn herself. So despite all this, though, Joe DiMaggio proposes to Marilyn on New Year's Eve in 1954. Yeah, can't remember off the top of my head. 54, I think. Sorry. I put 53, but I think it's 54. And this is after a very idyllic week with the DiMaggio family. I mean, Marilyn's there with his family. She's baking, she's cooking, she's taking care of the house, all this stuff.
She's
everything
being domestic.
Exactly. And I think that they get swept up in this, and they end up being wed January 14th of 1954. So yes, he did propose New Year's Eve 1954. In a
1953 into
well, yeah,
54.
1950 into 54.
New
You know
Year's
what I mean?
Eve is 53, right?
I know. New Year's Eve. In a quick civil ceremony before a judge in San Francisco, and the couple immediately went to business. They took a business trip overseas, which is kind of very famous because Marilyn goes off on her own. And Joe DiMaggio is in an interview, basically says, "Well, I've seen very little of my wife, on this trip, but I'm hoping to see her later." This is kind of the moment that Marilyn realized she could do it without anybody. She didn't have Joe. She didn't have Natasha. She didn't have a business manager. She had no studio people. She was just there to entertain 60,000 troops, and she sent it off without a freaking hitch, in my opinion. But Joe was having issues of his own insecurity, because he didn't realize that the international appeal for Marilyn was so huge. And he actually calls an agent, Norman Brokaw, who actually introduced him and Marilyn. That's him on the left, obviously. That's Kim Novak on the right, in case you're wondering. But he actually introduced Marilyn and Joe years earlier, and he tells Brokaw, quote, "I don't know what to do, Norm. I love her, but I can't accept her career. I want her to quit, but she won't do it." And basically Brokaw calms him down, blah blah blah, and says, "Hey, look, what if somebody told you to tell you quit your career after
Quit
hitting so many,
baseball. Yeah.
yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I never thought about it like that." So yeah, calm down, DiMaggio. But it still didn't really seem to do the trick because Marilyn lands. There's no business like show business, and Natasha's present was still firmly planted in Marilyn's daily life. And we
She
start
was
to
the buffer. Natasha was the
she
buffer.
was. Well, she was her acting coach. And as we know, I think it's very well known that Marilyn relied on her acting coaches a lot.
Yes.
A lot. Mentally, coaching her through scenes, all that kind of stuff. So it's no weirdness to it that Natasha is so prevalent in Marilyn's life. But DiMaggio had a big old problem with it. Now, Marilyn's addiction to pills had steadily risen during all of this time, all of this going on. And she had become more and more dependent on them to sleep, to kind of make it through, so to speak. And about the same time is when Natasha starts to claim that the abuse begins to take place from DiMaggio towards Marilyn. Now, however, one of DiMaggio's closest friends remembers in a quote, "He was smacking her around. Yes, he didn't seem too ashamed of it either. He said that she brought out the worst in him, that he wasn't usually that kind of man. He said he was spoiled and very self-centered, and it drove him crazy. He told me he was sick of coddling her, tired of her woe is me stories, as he put it. I said, Joe, maybe you should get divorced. He looked at me as if I was crazy and said, I ain't letting her go. He said, hell if I'm letting her go." So I think we see another man that became fixated on Marilyn, but not with her. They didn't want to support her ambitions and her desires. They just wanted her.
They wanted to possess her.
Mm-hmm. And it was in September of 1954 when basically it all comes crashing down when Marilyn takes on the infamous role in The 7-Year Itch with Tom Ewell. Is that his last name? Ewell.
Yeah, you're correct.
In which she plays the insatiable lust interest of a next door neighbor. And we all know by now that there is an infamous scene where Marilyn is standing above a subway grate and her skirt blows up and all this stuff. And it's like the highlight of the freaking movie. It's what really helps this movie become a box office hit because everybody's like, "Ooh, Marilyn's skirt." Well, Joe freaking hated it. He was there for the filming, and there was about 5,000 other onlookers that were there as well that had gathered around. And he became, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was it. He was infuriated. And just one more blow to his ego. They took a 52-foot tall Marilyn. This is the subway grate scene, obviously, that we know. And 52-foot tall Marilyn and placed her in Times Square. And he basically
lost his
fucking
mind.
Lost his mind. And by early October, they made the announcement that they were going to divorce. And it was because a difference in careers was the reason.
Yeah, she had one and he was retired.
Yeah. But I think that there's more sources that state and talk about the abuse during this marriage from DiMaggio to Marilyn. So I think it's something that's well or needs to be kind of noted in this moment that there is alleged. Now, I wasn't there. I haven't heard anything from Marilyn herself. Haven't read anything from Marilyn herself. I'm not going to claim that he was abusive to her. We only have people who were in their close circle stating such. So if that was taking place, this is another obviously mental health situation that Marilyn is facing at this time. And Marilyn started to kind of like trust nobody throughout this kind of marriage.
Yeah, you get with a bad dude, it'll make you not trust anybody at all.
Well, she didn't want stories about her life getting out to the media, and I can't help but think that maybe that has to do with possibly some of the abuse that had started, alleged abuse that had started at that point. So after her divorce from DiMaggio, she really kind of turns to this one man she feels like she could trust, and that was Frank Sinatra. And she moves in with him to regain some kind of emotional bearings. And both of them seem to kind of be bonding over their divorces at the time. Frank was getting divorced from Ava Gardner, and Marilyn obviously had just gotten divorced from Joe DiMaggio. And however, Marilyn didn't seem to change her behavior. And so she'd walk around nude a lot. And Sinatra basically says, I walked into the kitchen and there was Marilyn in the buff trying to decide whether it was orange juice or grapefruit juice that she wanted to drink one morning for breakfast. And he was like, and that was the end of our platonic relationship because they basically had it out right there in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even with them getting along and having this, I guess, newfound friends with benefits, Marilyn walks into naked into the middle of a poker game with friends, and that was it. Marilyn moved. He was like, "Nope, you're done."
Yeah.
Um, but Joe DiMaggio was not done with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Yeah, I hate this part because this is just it. Kind of leads me to the alleged abuse stuff. Kind of, I don't know, be more possible. But Marilyn's dependency on these sleeping pills had been growing during this time, and she began this quick tryst with a man whose name was Hal Schaefer. And DiMaggio basically wanted to catch them in the act. And so, in a backstabbing turn of events, DiMaggio ends up working with Sinatra, and they end up hiring detectives to bug and follow Marilyn around. And during all this, Marilyn gets her divorce. She takes a stand and she basically claims that she had done everything she could to make the marriage work, and that basically DiMaggio was a hothead. And it worked. Divorce granted. But on November 5th, 1954, after DiMaggio and Sinatra had got word that Marilyn and Schaefer were shacking up an apartment close by, the two men, joined by two detectives, went to the apartment and burst the door down to gain entry. Only issue, it was the wrong apartment. And this mistake would become what is known as the wrong door raid. But imagine, if you will, Marilyn's mentality of that. Your ex is basically hunting you
She
down.
was being stalked. There's a lot of people who can identify with that.
And Marilyn and Hal were in the apartment complex that night, not the apartment. So she heard the hustle and bustle and all the commotion going on. But both men would actually later be sued by the lady that they busted in for like $250,000. And Sinatra was pinned with like the whole damn thing because DiMaggio didn't have, he was a Florida resident. Somebody had been a Florida resident. Anyways. So she ends up making this big change after this. She's like, I got to get away. Despite the sleeping pills, despite the wrong door raid, DiMaggio, all of this stuff, Natasha's overbearing presence, she picks up and she moves to New York. She's like, that's it. Deuces, peace out. And she goes up there and she starts Marilyn Monroe Productions with Milton Green. And she begins therapy as well, and also starts studying under Lee Strasberg there, who is using the method acting at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And
Strasberg
of course,
method acting, yes, very famous, still taught in acting schools today. Yes.
Yep. And his wife, Paula Strasberg, would end up kind of replacing Natasha as acting coach for Marilyn. The problem was with Marilyn, when you have somebody who's doing method acting in the way that she was, is that the process causes the actor, for those that don't know, to be able to like reach way down for sense memories and basically bring them to the surface, which Marilyn was good at. Everybody said she was great at that. But it became an issue when she could no longer escape the emotions that she was facing. And the thoughts of the paranoia and all that stuff she kept bringing to the surface, she couldn't turn it off. That was the issue with Marilyn. And so she begins around this time to secretly date another well-known person in her life, a playwright that y'all might know by the name of Arthur Miller, who's a wonderful playwright, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would only end up adding to the pain instead of easing it off Marilyn. He really was, I will say, one of probably the great loves in Marilyn's life, but the marriage was fraught with issues from the beginning. I mean, they were secretly dating because he was married when they met. The two of them were attracted to one another due to their intellect. And Miller saw in Marilyn this person that was passionate about the underdog and had more liberal views. And the same can be said for the attraction from Marilyn to Miller. So adding to the paranoia in Marilyn's life, Miller at this time had been being investigated by the FBI because of his close ties to the Communist Party. He actually is found guilty of contempt of Congress for not revealing names of his friends that are tied to that. But this starts Marilyn's file with the FBI as well, which definitely is not going to help somebody who has paranoid tendencies. Excuse me. Sorry. And so Marilyn starts to begin feeling that I guess she feels like she's intellectually inferior to Miller in some states, in some situations. And a lot of people have alluded to this being a Svengali situation where he basically gained control over her because he knew that he had superior intellect over her, which I think is
He
bullshit.
mesmerized her.
Yeah.
He was
And so,
mesmerizing.
yeah. And so, with her feeling like she was intellectually inferior, this gave her a sense of kind of this dread because she just, she claims that she kind of felt she knew it too. And this basically kind of caused her to be living in this pain now. This no escape of this constant pain to this guy that she was dating. And while he was under oath during an investigation, he basically says, I have a production that's taking place in England, and I will be there with a woman who will be my wife. News to Marilyn, that's how he proposes. And so that night, in a ceremony that I believe lasted like 4 minutes, they're married. Before a judge at Westchester County Courthouse in White Plains, New York. And an official ceremony would end up following. That's the one where they did all the Jewish stuff and all that and everything. And they go to England again, straight off to business. They go to England, and Marilyn starts filming one of the films for Marilyn Monroe Productions, The Prince and the Showgirl. Fantastic movie, by the way, but I won't go into that. That's for another episode. Prior to the filming starting, though, Marilyn finds a journal Arthur Miller had accidentally set out on the table and left out on the table. And in this were notes that he was regretting his decision to marry Marilyn, that she wasn't intellectual. She was a spoiled brat, that his own career was in jeopardy because he had married her. And in some cases, some sources say the word whore was allegedly scribbled on one of the pages as well. And of course, this sends Marilyn into another tailspin because she's married to this guy now. But she vows
she just found out what he really thinks about her.
Yep. But she vows that she is not going to divorce him. She's going to stick it out. She didn't want the media and the public to think that she was basically
had failed again.
Yeah, had failed again. She couldn't maintain a marriage. She couldn't keep a husband. So she ends up sticking it out while they're over in England. She films the movie, which is a fantastic movie. I'm like, again, not going to go. I mean, it's just so readily available. Prince and the Showgirl. It's one of my favorites, by the way. But that's for another episode. And so they end up getting through this. And when they get back to the States, Marilyn goes to her now New York psychoanalyst, Dr. Marion Chris, who I have big old issues with later on in Marilyn's life, and we'll get to. She ends up going to her about 5 days a week now. And this journey, I guess, that Marilyn was on with Dr. Marion Chris was beginning to take a toll. Because Marilyn ends up splitting with Milton Green from Marilyn Monroe Productions, and the company basically dissolves, if you will. So what she ends up focusing on is she wants to have children. Now, this is something that we haven't talked about in all the Marilyn episodes, even the initial podcast episode that we did. Marilyn, in a younger age, was fearful to become a mother because she was afraid of turning out like her mother. But Marilyn, in her later years, wanted to become a mother because she felt she could give her child what her mother did not, and that was love and attention and basically a home.
Or was it that she wanted someone who would unconditionally love her?
Could. Very well could. But so she ends up getting pregnant, but due to her, no, not this one, sorry. She ends up having an ectopic pregnancy. And so while this is taking place, she begins to have doubts about the father, not who the father is, but the baby's father, Miller. She begins to have doubts about him because of this journal. This marriage is.
And I'm going to tell you this: he did not leave that out accidentally. Whenever you write things like that about somebody, first of all, why the hell you ever leave an evidence? You never write that crap down. You talk to somebody, and so you can call them a liar later. You don't write that down. And I guarantee you, something that's that private and that personal, your most innermost thoughts. And I was married to someone who liked to write, and you keep all that kind of buttoned up, all your writings, because you kind of keep that put away. Yeah, he left that out for her to find it on purpose. That isn't something you just leave lying around.
Yeah. I would almost have to agree with you on that. But so just like anybody in Marilyn's situation, Marilyn falls into a very deep depression between August of 1957 and July of 1958 over losing this pregnancy. She feels like she has failed as a mother, and she was stuck in a marriage that wasn't fulfilling. And this kind of cold war continues to take place between these spouses that feel like they're both stuck. Miller feels like he couldn't write because of all the stress. He spent many a night sleeping alone in guest bedrooms. Marilyn did what Marilyn knew to do. She turned back to pills and alcohol, to kind of help cope and get through it, which kind of began to greatly affect her ability to remember things and how she carried herself. But even in the midst of this, I'm going to call it a mind fuck, Marilyn begins to film Some Like It Hot. And it's really this movie in which her unprofessionalism, not being able to show up, and all of that comes out. Her tardiness to the set. But I think it's because nobody on the set knew the extent of the full story. That's not something she's going to run out and tell everybody that she starts on a new movie set. Hey, this is what's going on in my life. But after, this is kind of also one of my favorite Marilyn moments too. After the movie was completed, those on set would end up taking to the media and say very unkind statements to her. Well, she ends up calling the writer Billy Wilder, calls him up. His wife answers the phone, and Marilyn says, quote, after asking if Wilder's home, and Audrey says no. Marilyn says, quote, "That's fine. I wonder, Audrey, could you give me a message? Could you give him a message for me?" Audrey says, "Of course." Marilyn says, "Would you please tell him that Marilyn called and that she would like it very much if he would go fuck himself. Oh, and Audrey, my warmest regards and personal regards to you." I have to laugh about that.
Love that.
Fucking get it, Marilyn. So we're now at December of 1958. Marilyn becomes pregnant again, according to very close friends, and her half-sister Bernice as well. But again, she suffers another miscarriage. And this time she ends up blaming this one on herself because of the pills and the alcohol. And she starts asking friends, could I have killed it? So you see a different take.
Internalizes it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One time, the first time with it being a topic, she could maybe wrap her head around, okay, there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
But if this was a viable pregnancy, yeah, you would question yourself. Absolutely. Even though nature makes the decision, for the most part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Bernice, Marilyn's half-sister, says that she felt that this was the moment her half-sister started slipping away at this point. And we're talking in 1958. Because in 1959, Marilyn doesn't work. She does not work at all that entire year. Instead, she undergoes a number of operations in June of that year for either her endometriosis again or to find out why she's having an issue having a normal pregnancy, or possibly both. But so we go through all 1959 of her dealing with all of this. She doesn't work, but by 1960, she's getting back into the game. And she lands the next movie, Let's Make Love, starring alongside Yves Montand. And it's written by Arthur Miller, though. And Miller saw this opportunity to put in words that his wife would then have to recite on camera. And to me, that's just the ultimate fuck up. Like, it's just fucked up. But anyways, so
yeah, it's a manipulation tactic, passive aggressive.
Yeah. And through this movie, Yves Montand and Marilyn Monroe begin a very tawdry and very highly publicized affair that was even used in the marketing of Let's Make Love. And if the Miller Monroe was not in dire straits by then, it was all but over by the end of the affair at this point. Because Miller, even staying in this contentious marriage, he starts to date a photographer later on. Yeah, it gets horrible. But in the spring of 1960, another powerful key player enters Marilyn's life, and that is going to be Patricia Kennedy Lawford. And many would refer as Marilyn's best friend. She was the wife of British actor Peter Lawford and sister to President and Attorney General, JFK and RFK, those two little minuscule people that play a part in Marilyn's life.
Yeah, you might have heard of them.
You might have heard of them by now. This is episode 5. But it was because that Pat had something that Marilyn had always longed for, and of course that was children and a family. She didn't have any of that. So Marilyn would end up doting over Pat and Peter's kids, and it was Peter himself who introduced his wife to Pat, because the two had actually met and dated briefly back in 1950. I think that's a fun little tidbit that I want to throw in there. And Peter was crazy about Marilyn, but she was not crazy about him. So this relationship with Marilyn was kind of one of pride for Pat Kennedy. She wanted everybody to know that Marilyn was her friend. And Marilyn
Mm-hmm.
didn't really, she really wanted to just kind of keep it between the two women that they were friends. You know, there wasn't anything too big about it. They would be more telephone friends.
Well, there are always those people that go, "Oh, my friend," and they'll name drop,
Oh, God, yeah.
which is completely tacky.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they want you to know how important they are.
Oh,
It's not
yeah.
good enough that she's the sister of the president,
Yeah.
but now but Marilyn Monroe is my friend.
Yeah.
Step back, tacky. Go back to. It's just tacky.
But
Then there's even a female trying to use her.
yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah. I didn't even think about that angle of it. But yeah. Pat Kennedy is actually the one who introduces Marilyn to JFK at the Democratic Convention in 1960 when he makes that big spiel at the Coliseum and whatnot. And it's kind of found out in that moment, of course, JFK and Marilyn are flirting with each other. Of course, it's the most powerful woman in Hollywood. It's the most powerful man in the United States. Of course, they're flirting with each other. I mean, Jesus Christ. And it was that worry that, Marilyn would become too loose-lipped with their flirtation and all. He was a president hopeful. We couldn't have all that. So Marilyn was kind of set straight, with that. Like, you don't do that. Mm-mm. But with all that going on, Marilyn lands another role in The Misfits. Now, The Misfits is unfortunately the last full-length movie that Marilyn was to ever make in her life. And again, Arthur Miller would take the opportunity to write things that basically portrayed Marilyn's real life during all this. So you can imagine that filming the movie was absolutely fucking torturous, I'm sure. And Paula Strasberg became a constant issue on set. And basically, Marilyn couldn't make a move without her. Marilyn had become so dependent on Paula at this point, and so dependent on pills and alcohol at this point. We're talking 1960, end of 1960. She started to complain about the voices again, according to Paula, and she couldn't take it anymore. So she goes to her newest West Coast psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, who begins prescribing 300 milligrams. Sorry, this is Dr. Greenson, 300 milligrams of Nimbutal, which is 3 times the amount he should have been at this time, which does nothing but make her a freaking walking zombie in her waking hours and added to her extreme paranoia.
Let's fix
So
the pill problem with more pills.
with more drugs, yes, absolutely. So Marilyn ends up becoming hospitalized during all of this. Just basically, she needs to recoup. I mean, her body is running at maximum speed as much as it can. And director John Hudson for the Misfits, he would actually kind of use Marilyn as a scapegoat for stopping the film and the production, as he had basically almost gambled away the entire budget for the Misfits. And Marilyn would recover, but her mental state was the thing that was ended up taking a toll. She ended up telling Niagara director, I don't remember his name, but she says, quote, "All of my life I've played Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn Monroe. I've tried to do a little better, and when I do, I find myself doing an imitation of myself. I so want to do something different. That was one of the things that attracted me to Arthur when he said he was attracted to me. When I married him, one of the fantasies in my mind was that I could get away from Marilyn Monroe through him, and here I find myself back doing the same thing. I just couldn't take it. I had to get out of there. I just couldn't face having to do another scene with Marilyn Monroe." So she's very like, it's almost like this monster that she has created herself is starting to overtake. That's the way that I take that message.
I would agree. She's created the persona, and the
Mhm.
persona has become bigger than who she actually is.
Yep.
So the bell can't be unrung.
Mm-mm. And so the end of 1960, it's just like blow, blow, blow to freaking Maryland, because filming wraps on Misfits. They announced Arthur and Marilyn announced their divorce shortly after Clark Gable dies of a massive heart attack. Gable's wife comes out and basically says that Marilyn's to blame for it because of her unprofessionalism and tardiness on set and too much stress. She is screamed at from passing cars. How does it feel to be a murderer? I mean, she's having to deal with all of this stuff as well. And so With her divorce granted in early January 1961, she ends up going back to marrying Chris, and this is where I hate this woman, who basically says, she goes to her for guidance, and she basically says, I don't know what to do. She says, you know what you need? You need a nice long rest in a hospital. Marilyn goes, you're right. I do. What actually happened is that Marilyn was placed in the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic, and that was a place that she absolutely, definitely didn't belong. And what I'm actually about to talk about is from Marilyn's account herself, that she had disclosed to Dr. Chris this thought of a suicide attempt in February of 1961, in which she would leap from a window to her death, but at the last minute she had changed her mind. And Dr. Chris herself ends up taking Marilyn to the clinic after this, checking her in under the name Faye Miller. And Marilyn is led to another section of this massive hospital. And this section is unlike any other one. According to Marilyn herself, the orderlies that were leading her seemed to be more forceful, and she noticed all the steel doors she had walked through needed a key card on both sides. And suddenly it hit her that these doors were for keeping people in, not out. And this flood of emotions concerning her mother, her grandmother, her grandfather, other family members who had actually had mental health issues as well came flooding into her mind. And she basically started questioning, was I to remain there for the rest of my days and die in this asylum just as they did?
She'd become a prisoner, not a patient.
Mm-hmm. She is placed in this is all according to Marilyn. She is placed in a padded room with barred windows, and the walls show the violence and markings from former patients. And Marilyn began to pound on the door until her hands and wrists were bruised. Nurses came in and threatened a straitjacket if she didn't calm down. Marilyn is stripped of her clothing. She's put in a hospital gown and left in the padded room in total darkness with only her thoughts and her fears and without her medication. And the reason why I'm reading it like this is because I'm trying to give you kind of verbatim what Marilyn said.
That's what they do to prisoners that they are torturing. They lock them in solitary confinement with no doors, no windows, no light.
Yep.
Sometimes no clothing.
Yep.
Yeah, that doesn't really sound like treatment. That sounds like torture to me.
So the following day, Marilyn attempts to place a phone call from a payphone, but she's stopped by a security guard. And her only other option, she thought, was to make as much noise as she could to summon someone new to take pity on her. So with this, she grabbed a chair and, as she put it, took all the strength and threw it at the bathroom door in her room. Nothing happened. She said she repeatedly threw the chair at the door until the double thick glass cracked, and she reached out and extracted a small sliver. And with all of this racket, obviously an entire teams of doctors showed up, and she sat before them with a shard of glass to her wrist and said, quote, "If you don't let me out of here, I will kill myself," she told the doctors. She would actually rationalize later on in this moment, or about this moment later on, that she was acting out one of the scenes from Don't Bother to Knock, which is true, but it's a razor blade in the movie. It's not a piece of glass, but neither here nor there. But it didn't seem to the medical team that she was acting something out. So they end up pouncing on her, get the shard of glass away from her, and they take her to another floor. She's examined by a doctor there who told her, quote, "You are a very, very sick girl, and you've been very sick for a long time." And Marilyn says she didn't know how to respond to this, and the doctor walked away after scribbling down, quote, "extremely disturbed," and also, quote, "potentially self-destructive" in his notes. And it wasn't until the following day that a sympathetic nurse allowed Marilyn a piece of paper and pen to make contact with someone by mail, and Marilyn contacts Lee and Paula Strasberg in a note that reads, quote, "Dear Lee and Paula, Dr. Chris has put me in the hospital under the care of two idiot doctors. They both should not be my doctors. You haven't heard from me because I'm locked up with these poor nutty people. I'm sure to end up a nut too if I stay in this nightmare. Please help me. This is the last place I should be. I love you both. Marilyn. P.S. I'm on the dangerous floor. It's like a cell. They had my bathroom door locked and couldn't get the keys into it, so I broke the glass. But outside of that, I haven't done anything uncooperative." The Strasbergs would actually never answer Marilyn's letter for help because they call the doctor, and the doctor says, "Well, she said that she attempted suicide," and they go, "Yep, that's where she belongs then." And Marilyn, the following day, was allowed to make one phone call after acting like she was at least calm. And the person she chose was the man that would continually save her, Joe DiMaggio. And Joe said Marilyn wasn't making much sense at first when he got on the phone with her. He thought it was a joke. But as soon as Marilyn described the situation and said that she needed him, Joe was on the next flight to New York and at the clinic that night right in front of her. And even though they had been divorced 6 years by then, he was demanding they release his wife to him. And they were basically like, Dr. Chris is the only one that can give the release. Da, 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 da. And he says, quote, I don't care who does it, but if someone doesn't get her release from this place, I swear to Christ, I'll take this hospital apart brick by brick. And so the last day that Marilyn's in there, Ralph Roberts, Marilyn's friend and masseuse later on, picks her up from the clinic with Dr. Chris in the back seat. And Marilyn goes fucking ballistic on her and starts screaming at her, how dare you betray me? I trusted you. How could you do that to me? And you didn't even visit me. What is wrong with you? Basically calling her everything under the sun except for Christian. And so Marilyn exits the car and she leaves Dr. Chris trembling into the back seat. And DiMaggio is at her house with her. She actually does agree to go to another
Facility.
Facility. Thank you. I was trying to think of the word. And she's actually admitted into the Neurological Institute of Columbia University Presbyterian, where she would remain for 3 weeks, so long as Joe DiMaggio visited her every single day, and he agreed to do so. And
for whatever you want to say about Joe DiMaggio,
yeah, I know.
He loved her.
I know he did. He did until his freaking dying day.
Look, that makes me teary. He loved her. Oh, he loved her.
He loved her. Did.
And he did want her to be well, even if he couldn't possess her. Look, that makes me all teary.
I know. He's also the one that placed flowers on her grave.
That is actually flowers appeared. Was it once a week without fail?
It's once a week. Yep. Once a
week. Until after he passed away, and I believe they still appear there. Do they not?
I don't think so anymore, and I think they actually stopped just prior to his death.
Oh, okay.
So I believe. I don't know. I could be wrong, but so Marilyn ends up getting released from this hospital. She's obviously she went through all this mental. She doesn't describe what happened in there, and frankly, I don't really care because she comes out looking fantastic, and I had a picture in here, but I guess I lost it. And when she's released, though, she immediately receives another bit of shocking news. The first thing that happens is that Grace Goddard calls and tells her he's going to release a tell-all about Marilyn's life in that first marriage to Jim Doherty because he was tired of hearing it was at Grace's insistence that she married Jim. Yeah, so she's about to have a tell-all released on her life. And then Inez Melson gets a call from Rockhaven's sanitarium that basically says, we went into Gladys's room today and there was blood-soaked bed sheets and she had slit her wrists. And they withhold that information from Marilyn. They don't tell her. Basically, no, we're not telling Marilyn. We're just going to let it be.
We're not going to tell Marilyn her mama just did this.
Yeah. So through the rest of 1961, Marilyn kind of rekindles this relationship with Joe DiMaggio, even though he was in a relationship with another woman. And she would also rekindle this other relationship that she had with Frank Sinatra. She would end up going under the knife for gallstone surgery in June of 1961. I mean, my God, there really seemed to be no freaking end to this woman's physical and emotional crises that she had. However, Marilyn's paranoia, as it's noted, begins to grow well past the hearing of voices and being followed. Now she begins to believe that people can actually, or that people are actually attempting to poison her and her food. And that's actually kind of reported by one of their friends who said they got Chinese, and she's like, I don't want any, throw it out. You can have it if you want, but it's been poisoned. So Dr. Greenson, through notes, we kind of see Dr. Greenson's diagnosis of Marilyn Monroe is being that she had or was, quote, a borderline paranoid addictive personality with classic signs of paranoid addict. Fear of abandonment and also a tendency to rely on others too heavily. He also stated with this disease, people are prone to more attempts at taking their own life. The more that he treated her, he turned towards paranoid schizophrenic as her diagnosis. And Dr. Engelberg, who became her physician, added to this diagnosis, stating that she had like a bipolar disorder or a manic depressive, as he put it. He actually says it's now called bipolar disorder, but manic depressive is more the definition of what it would be, what it would have been.
Extreme highs, extreme lows.
Exactly. And it is noted at this time that Marilyn had become a very expert doctor shopper, specifically for the drug Thorazine. That was kind of her go-to drug was Thorazine.
And
Those
what
around
doctor is going to tell Marilyn Monroe that,
That's
she goes,
exactly
she says, oh
it.
my goodness, I need it. It's a last minute thing. I have to have some of this. Can you please prescribe it for me? I'm have to be on set in an hour. Can you help me quickly? Da 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 da. Yes.
And
Who's
even
going
if
to tell her
she
no?
and even if she did, she'd just go to the next doctor. She's
That's
going to
right.
find somebody who's going to say yes and prescribe
Be
Thorazine to her.
starstruck and go, of course, Miss
Yep,
Monroe, I'll be happy to help you.
absolutely. And it's during that friends and close people to her, like Inez Melson, her business manager, and Bernice, her half sister, start saying that, like, this therapy is what's the issue. It's not your mental state; it's the therapy that you spend too much time thinking about your problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Marilyn starts begin telling people she's being followed by the FBI and that they knew what she was thinking, which is very disturbing to a lot of people around her at that point. And as a result of this therapy, the doctors, as well as doctor shopping, the list of medicines that we know Marilyn was taking at this time include Thorazine, Demerol, phenobarbital HMC, Amitol, Nimbutal, Seconal, chloral hydrate, vitamin shot injections for infections and sinus issues, injections she administered herself, as seen by many friends, mixed with only God knows what, as well as self-medicating with alcohol and pills. So this is what she's all, doing throughout all of this time.
Is what, can you tell me, what did you say Sexicoline was in there?
Seconal. Basically,
Is
everything that she is on is uppers or downers.
right. I'm sorry. I thought I heard Sexicoline in there.
No, no, I did
Okay.
not say that. Mm-mm.
Okay.
So a lot of people begin thinking that Dr. Greenson is having too much control over her life at this point as well. He begins telling her what friends she can be with, what friends she needs to get rid of. He begins coaching her on which parts she should take, what parts she shouldn't take. He actually is quoted as saying, quote, above all, I try to help her not to be so lonely and therefore to escape into drugs or get involved in a very destructive people who will engage in some sort of sadomasochist relationship with her. This is the kind of planning you do with an adolescent girl who needs guidance, friendliness, and firmness, and she seems to take it very well. She said for the first time, she looked forward to coming to Los Angeles because she could speak to me. Of course, this does not prevent her from canceling several hours to go to Palm Springs with Mr. FS, allegedly Frank Sinatra.
Right. Sinatra.
She is as unfaithful to me as one is to a parent. That whole shit pisses me off. You are her therapist.
Interesting choice of word, though. You don't think of your child as being unfaithful to you. You think of a spouse or a
Mm-hmm.
lover. She is as
Mm-hmm.
unfaithful to me as
Mm-hmm.
a child is to a parent, but those words don't match.
Mm-hmm.
This is someone saying something or planting a seed in your head when she tells you that. Because
Well,
unfaithful is different than disobedient.
yep.
A child would be disobedient to a parent, but a child wouldn't be unfaithful to a parent. That doesn't work. Those words don't match. Again, I'm all about the syntax.
Oh, I know. I know. And his syntax is very strange in there.
Yes, it does not prevent her from being unfaithful to me. You
Yeah.
mean disobedient, like a
Right.
child would be to a parent?
Right.
That's an interesting word choice.
I agree. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah.
So it's also during a discussion with Pat Kennedy Lawford that it occurs to Pat that Greenson had way too much control over Marilyn because she got this feeling that Marilyn was convinced that in her condition, or that her condition was serious enough that she needed Dr. Greenson indefinitely because Marilyn had said, quote, and I can trust him not to tell anyone. And when Pat's like, tell anyone what? And she says, that I'm like my mother. Because that's what Dr. Greenson was telling her at this time, was that he alluded a lot to her mother. And what's even more dangerous about it is you have this therapist who not only is saying what I just read about Marilyn, that she has her thinking this way, but Mickey Rudin has also become Marilyn's new attorney at this point. Mickey Rudin is the brother-in-law. He's the one pictured on the left without the dog. He is Greenson's brother-in-law, as well as Sinatra's lawyer. And moreover, Greenson was Sinatra's therapist as well. And Greenson also takes the time to replace Ralph Roberts in Marilyn's life with probably the oddest character in Marilyn's history, and that is Eunice Murray, the housekeeper. But Eunice Murray wasn't really a housekeeper. She claimed to be a nurse, and the only reason why she got the job is because she had homemaking skills. And Dr. Greenson thought that made her worthy enough to be Marilyn's companion. But sometimes she'd stay the night, sometimes she wouldn't. A lot of people of Marilyn's
So,
friends said that she was weird and feared that Dr. Greenson had actually placed Eunice in Marilyn's house as a spy.
and I do not doubt that at all, because it's very difficult to take someone who is a nurse, who is trained, a trained professional, and say, guess what? Today you're going to be a maid, and you're going to be
Yeah.
a maid until I tell you you're not a maid anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with being a maid. However, if you go to school to become something, having to do something else, that's like, wait, why?
Yeah. And so many of Marilyn's friends attest to like Eunice Murray, skulking around corners and taking mental notes
She looks like a
and
skulker.
reporting back to the doctor, including those who visited, how long they stayed, what was the nature of the business. Things that just really is not going to help somebody who has the words paranoia or paranoid in their description.
And things
So,
followed anyway.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So DiMaggio catches wind of this, and he decides he's going to spend a Christmas with Marilyn. And he was there maybe 30 minutes. This is my favorite DiMaggio story, by the way. And he had figured out at the moment when he got there was spending time with her that things had gotten much worse for Marilyn. And he had something he wanted to say about it to Eunice Murray herself. And Joe said to Murray, quote, "I don't want you knowing anything about me or my business. You work for Marilyn, but you are not her friend. And you are not my friend. And if it were up to me, you wouldn't even exist."
Joe DiMaggio was a hot-headed asshole who did not mind saying what he thought ought to be said.
I'm sure she had a lot to say about DiMaggio to Dr. Greenson.
Can you imagine those fights? Because Marilyn didn't mind saying what she thought either. You know that those
Oh my
fights
God.
probably had somebody's going, call the law. The DiMaggios are at it again.
And so, according to Pat Newcomb, who is Marilyn's publicist at this time in 1962, it had gotten out that Marilyn was sick and a drug addict. And so she was very fearful for Marilyn's career at this point and life at this point. But this is the mentality that we carry in the 1962. This is basically before the most disastrous year of her entire life, obviously. I know we've discussed in detail 1962 in previous episodes, as well as the initial podcast episode back in August 2nd. So I'm not going to be covering a lot of Marilyn's movements during this year's, just so much as her mental state throughout this year. And the year starts with Marilyn purchasing a brand new home. It is her Brentwood home, the home that we all know, the home that has all the pictures in it. And this was a place where she finally felt like she had some stability. Now, one weird
home.
And one weird thing that is noted about it is outside there's a tile that is labeled Cursum Perficio, which basically means here my journey ends. I think it's very kind of foreboding and foreshadowing. And so it's around this time in early 1962 that Marilyn meets Bobby Kennedy. We've gone in great detail on the last episodes with that. And with her diagnosis of having addictive personality, of course, she becomes extremely infatuated with both the Kennedy brothers. And in my opinion, it's their intellect, just like Arthur Miller, that attracts her to them. And I think both of these men, once again, just like Arthur Miller, it became a Svengali situation where they knew that they were, or felt that they were intellectually superior to her. So they had some control over her, and she's enamored and they're enamored. And it's just this, I don't know. It's kind of a very,
It's a mutual admiration society, but they don't, what they admire about the other, the shine quickly wears off of that star. They
very
love the
true.
fact that she's a superstar and she's beautiful and she's gorgeous, but they neglect to see what's behind us, that she needs them to talk to her. She's very needy. She wants you here. She doesn't want to let you go. She is willing to go to whatever length, and they're smart and everything, but they're dismissive, and they're they're like, we're too important. Oh my goodness, yes, you're good to screw, but you're not good enough to divorce a wife and marry.
Yeah.
You're fun to play with.
You're the plaything.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what each likes of the other, the shine quickly wears off.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. But during this winter springtime in 1962, Marilyn, despite her excessive alcohol and pill use, she seems to kind of be getting back on her feet. However, by now it's kind of reported that she's taking pills with champagne at this point, so she's taking it a step further even. We've already talked about her having the alleged affair with JFK. This is one possibly documented time that they're intimate. We've talked about the
The
Happy Birthday,
last
Mr.
weekend.
Well,
Hmm.
Happy Birthday, Mr. President gala, where she's sick, all that stuff. So we go through all that, and from the span of June of 1962 to August of 1962, Marilyn experiences like this gamut of situations that slowly, kind of but surely, deteriorate her mental health to almost non-existent, in my opinion. Her maid Hazel Washington actually states after the gala for the president and his birthday that Marilyn just got sicker and sicker with no reprieve in sight. So June 1st, she turns 36. She's just recently been cut off from the president of the United States. Now, if you can imagine, America's sex symbol is turning 36 in 1962. At 36 in Hollywood, at that time, you're considered over the hill.
Oh,
And
yes.
the media begins to turn on her at this kind of point where they're like, she's still got it, but how much longer? She's holding on. She still looks good.
She's an aging star. Look at the young
Yeah.
starlet, the fresh faced
Yes.
18-year-old.
Yeah. And so you can imagine the amount of pressure that she had to go in and face the camera day after day after day after day, knowing all this. And to top it all off, on June 8th, she's let go. She's fired from the contract with Something's Got to Give. And the studio immediately begins the worst smear campaigns in Hollywood that Hollywood has ever seen, even still to this day. And they start posting shit out in the newspapers that she's gone round the bend and that she's very sick, poor thing. So Marilyn does what Marilyn does best, as she did in all her scandals. She retaliates and goes on the best freaking like interviews and photo shoots that she ever could have for Red Book, Vogue, Life, Cosmopolitan, all that stuff. She damned the studio, made the corrections, and 16 days later, they end up hiring her back, and she lands the biggest movie deal she's ever made. And it also seems around this time that the issues with the Kennedys are all okay because she's at a barbecue with them. But at the barbecue, she's told secrets. We went into that in past episodes, and that's kind of where they realize, shit, Marilyn's got loose lips. She's off telling all these people that she knows state secrets, so we got to shut her up. And we know that the Lost Weekend happens at the end of July, on July 28th and the 29th. And so it's like you're going into this weekend with not only that mentality, but something I did not cover in the Lost Weekend episode because I think it pertained more to this episode than that episode, is that a Cal Neva Lodge security guard, Joe Langford, was there the day that Marilyn was in the showroom, basically, with the others. And he says, quote, on the day she opened her purse and pulled out those syringes, I was standing right there with Mr. Sinatra and Pat Kennedy Lawford. Marilyn was very casual about it. She was looking for something else and just pulled them out and put them on the table. Sinatra went white like a sheet. He said, Marilyn, Jesus Christ, what are they for? She said, oh, those are my vitamin shots. By now we know that's either an injection of phenobarbital, Nibutol, or seconal, or a combination. And she was he goes on to say, quote, she was very nonchalant about it. Pat looked like she was going to faint, said, oh my God, Marilyn. She said, oh my God. Then Marilyn said, it's all right, Pat. I know what I'm doing. Marilyn was still going through her purse until finally she found what she was looking for. A pen, P-I-N, not P-E-N. And as we all stood there with our mouths open, she opened a bottle of pills and took one out. Then, and I had never seen anything like this before, she put a small hole at the end of the capsule and swallowed it, looked up and said, gets into your bloodstream faster that way. She turned back to Pat and said, see, I told you I knew what I was doing. So we now have seen the evolution of this woman who's not only just abusing pills and alcohol,
She
but
knows the tricks.
she knows the tricks now. And it's later that night and after just one drink that Marilyn excuses herself to her room. Now, according to Pat Lawford herself, she went to check on Marilyn and found her very wobbly and complaining that she was nauseous. She stayed in there, asked Marilyn, did you take another vitamin shot? And Marilyn became very ill and threw up as Pat held her hair back. And Sinatra had had enough. He basically says, get her out of here and get her out of here now. The fact that she could have died at Cal Neva.
Oh, he couldn't have that.
He had a line and she crossed it. That was the issue. And a lot of people say that they actually saw Marilyn leaving shaken with chills, looked very, very sick. So she leaves Cal Neva. The Lost Weekend is over, but this is the mentality we pick up with on Marilyn in her last week of her life. And this is a woman whose fantasy world had come crashing down when she was cut off by the Kennedy brothers. She was paranoid. She was convinced she was being followed, that her phone and house were bugged, that people could understand and hear her thoughts. A woman who was administering shots to herself as well as self-medicating with alcohol and with pills, namely phenobarbital, Nembutal, and Seconal. And a woman who was adamant about getting what she wanted when it came to her medication and was actually seeing who knows how many freaking doctors. And I think what ended up happening was Marilyn went into the last week of her life fixated on Bobby Kennedy. I think that to be true. Now, if we're going down this route that Marilyn has taken her own life, almost everybody in her life that was close to her made that notion that she went in fixated on Bobby Kennedy. She definitely would have been fixated on him on August 3rd when all the media hit that he was in town in California. And I think this would have been led to her being distraught and extremely intoxicated if she were self-medicating, administering shots to herself on the night of August 3rd that we talked about on the last episode. So is it plausible that Marilyn, distraught over Bobby Kennedy, decided to make an attempt on her life to gain the attention of Bobby on the night of August 4th, 1962? Yeah, it's very plausible. But for me,
Is it probable?
in order to do that, you have to disavow every statement that has been made in the last 60 years that contradicts this outcome.
Well, we all know that we do crazy things when we're heartbroken. And when we've been the spurned lover or the one that is spurning, there is always this bit of, oh, my heart hurts. And your heart physically does hurt. It's like grieving the loss. And so, have you? Probably all of us have done something stupid. Whether it's, we went out and got way too drunk, or, you know what, I'm just going to call you and say, I want it all to end. Do we actually follow through? Not usually.
Right.
Not usually, because some point in our brain goes, hey, this is temporary. This will pass.
Yep.
Do I think it was accidental? If we are going to say that it is possible that Marilyn Monroe died of an overdose, I'm not saying suicide, because suicide has intent behind it.
True.
Then I'm saying that if it is at all possible that she died, it would have been of an overdose, and I think it would have been accidental. That seems more probable than plausible. She just had a brand new contract with the studio that she busted her butt to get.
Yeah.
You know? And it's just, even though she had this paranoia thing going on, okay, she had managed to that point.
Yep. I agree. And I think if an overdose happened, it was accidental. But this is walking down the line of, this is where we are in Marilyn's mental state in the first week of August 1962, which is also the last week of her life. So
I think that she had been kicked in the gut far too many times before that moment, when she had been let go, when, everything with RFK, JFK was falling apart, when she had got taken to the mental institution, was locked away. I think there were far more chaotic moments in her life that might have pushed her to the suicide aspect.
I would definitely agree to that. Well, that is episode and part number 5 of the Monroe Files. And we have now walked down every avenue that we have wanted to take. We have walked down the last and final years of Marilyn's life. We have walked down the timeline of the night that she passed, all the statements since then. Now we have walked down Marilyn's mental health issues and mental state leading into the last week of her life. And next week, we are going to bring you part 6 on September the 21st at 8 p.m. live.
Central Standard Time.
Where we are going to sit back and discuss the last 5 episodes. Finally, Shelley, you're getting your discussion.
I know. I'm so ready to discuss. I was very good, except jumping ahead of you 1 point.
I know you were. I'm very happy
I will tell you that you did tell me something I did not know.
Awesome. That's always
I did not know about the opening of the purse and taking out all the syringes and then taking a a pin, like a safety pin, poking a hole in the end of the capsule to take the medicine with.
Yep.
I did not know that. I've never heard that.
Yep. Neither had I when I heard it. And I went, if I haven't heard it, neither has Shelley.
That, and I hadn't. And I told you, I'd be honest with you. If you came up with
know.
something I absolutely had not heard, I
I
would tell
know.
you. And I had not heard that.
I
That
know.
is fascinating.
Well, you guys,
So,
if you are liking these videos and liking all this, make sure you hit the little heart, the like, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and show us the love on that, because we have enjoyed bringing these to you week after week after week. And we
we're
are going
thinking about another one.
We are, and we are going to conclude it next week with our live discussion, like I said, on Wednesday, September the 21st at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So go follow every social media page you can think of that has everything vaguely paranormal, because we're probably going to be live on it that night. But for tonight, we thank you for joining us with the Monroe Files Part 5. We are everything vaguely paranormal. For myself, my name is Shelley Pruitt, and my awesome, fabulous special guest this whole time through, Shelley.
You said your name was Shelley Pruitt. You can be Shelley tonight.
I'll be Shelley.
Blake
You'll be
Smith.
Blake Smith. Let me just
That
screw
was
all
funny.
that up. I'm Blake
that's all right.
Smith. I'm
Shelley Pruitt,
never
just in
mind.
case you had
Yeah.
had a question.
Look, the names are at the bottom. It's okay.
That's right. Just read them yourself.
It's been a long night, but I hope you enjoyed it. Anyways,
We are such dorks.
we are. For myself, I'm Blake Smith. For my fabulous guest this whole time is Shelley Pruitt. Thank y'all for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye, y'all.